The moment the protagonist decided not to flinch, that decision, that precise stillness, became the architecture of everything. You are watching his eternal diary.
The scent hit him first. That specific cocktail of floor wax and catered shrimp and 200 competing perfumes folded into a space designed to look grander than it was. The Aldwych rooftop venue sat on the 42nd floor of a building that called itself a tower without quite earning the word. The views were decent. The lighting was amber warm, the kind that softened edges and made people look 10% more polished than they were. Someone had strung thin white lights along the ceiling trusses, and they cast a faint tremor on the parquet floor whenever the ventilation system pulsed. Ethan Voss stood near the outer edge of the main room, one hand curved around a glass of sparkling water. Gerson catalogued the room the way he always catalogued rooms, not with excitement, but with the quiet professional habit of identifying structural inconsistencies. He had done this since his 20s, since the first time a senior partner at Deloitte had handed him a spreadsheet and said, "The lie is always in the rounding, Voss, always in the number someone tried to smooth over." He had learned to read rooms the same way he read balance sheets. Not for what was present, for what had been omitted. The party was Clare's firm's annual winter gala. Hartley and Associates, investment advisory, 71 employees across 2 floors of a glass building on Lexington Avenue. Clare had been with the firm for 6 years. She was 33, ambitious in the particular way that wore its ambition like a second skin, not loud, not performative, was but present in every sentence she constructed, every room she entered. He had admired that quality once. He had told her so more than once, in the first year of their relationship, when admiration still felt like a clean thing, uncomplicated by what he now understood. He had not wanted to come tonight. That was the truth he was standing inside when she had handed him the invitation 3 weeks ago. A small printed card, the firm's letterhead, his name typed in a font that looked like it had been chosen to suggest importance. He had held the card and felt something move across his skin that was not quite warmth, something more like a wire being drawn taut. "It's a +1 situation," she had said from the kitchen, not looking up from her laptop. "I need you there." He had not asked why the invitation had taken 6 years to materialize, and he had understood, in the general contour of things, that Clare kept her professional world sealed from him. Not aggressively, not with obvious effort. It was more the way someone keeps a drawer locked, without necessarily having anything scandalous inside, just a habit of compartmentalization that over time becomes its own statement. He had told himself in the early years that it was her right to maintain professional privacy. Then he had told himself it was a quirk of her personality. Then he had run out of charitable interpretations and simply stopped asking. When she said she needed him there, he had heard the tactical edge beneath the domestic phrasing. She needed a +1 for optics. Someone presentable at her side during the annual review period when the managing director, Daniel Hartley, was deciding who moved into the VP suite and who stayed in middle management until they left, or got sidelined. Clare had been angling for that promotion for 8 months. Ethan had listened to the angles, the calculations, the assessments of who liked her and who didn't, the micro-adjustments to her behavior around certain senior partners. He had listened with the patience of a man who had long since stopped expecting to be a participant in those conversations and had settled for being an audience of one. He had bought a navy suit, had his hair cut by someone who cost more than he usually spent, because Clare had once, very quietly, mentioned that he looked like he dressed for the wrong decade. And he had absorbed that comment without responding, and filed it in the same internal cabinet where he kept everything she said that required a response he wasn't ready to give. She had looked at him when he emerged from the bedroom that evening and said, "Good," the way someone says good to a task completed satisfactorily. Not to a person, not to a man she had been sleeping beside for 4 years. He had driven them to the venue. She had been on her phone the entire ride, texting. Not work texts. He could see from the angle of her phone that she was in an Instagram story, scrolling. The texts were to someone named D.H. He had noted that. He had noted it the way he noted everything, without expression, without fanfare. Simply recorded. Now he stood with his sparkling water and let the room do what rooms do. None. He recognized the architecture of the evening within the first 20 minutes. The senior partners held the center of the room like planets held gravity, and the rest of the firm orbited at various distances depending on hierarchy. Clare had entered and peeled away from him almost immediately, drawn toward a cluster near the far window where a man in his mid-50s, with the particular posture of someone accustomed to being deferred to, was holding court. Daniel Hartley. Ethan had seen photographs. He looked like a man who played squash and remembered it. Clare had not introduced him. She had simply moved, and Ethan had watched her go and understood the message with the clarity of a man who had been reading between lines for years. He was not a secret. That was not quite the right word. He was more like a footnote, present in the private text of her life, but not referenced in the public version. The version that lived at events like this, under warm lights, in a dress the color of pale copper that she had spent 3 weeks selecting. He found a spot near the window overlooking the city and stood there and watched. Below, the city moved in its usual indifferent way. 10,000 points of light that didn't care about any of this. He found that comforting. He took a sip of his water and checked his watch. 8:14 p.m. He had been here 22 minutes. He had attended enough corporate gatherings over the years, as a consultant, as an expert witness, as someone firms brought in when their numbers needed someone who could explain clearly to a judge exactly how and where and why the deception had occurred, to understand the social architecture, the clustering, the performance of ease. The way people laughed a half-second before anything was actually funny, because the person laughing first always set the social temperature. He watched Clare work the room with the efficiency of someone who had studied it. She moved between clusters with a confidence that had not come from nowhere. He had watched her build it, year over year, through small, deliberate accumulations of composure. He could not deny that she was good at this. He could not deny a great many things that he had spent years trying not to look at directly. A woman appeared at his side, not Clare. A younger woman in a black blazer and heeled boots, who was also looking at the city with the expression of someone who had been looking at something inside a building for too long and needed a break. "You're here with Clare," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her. Mid-20s, dark hair, the kind of expression that suggested she observed more than she said. Her name badge read, Lena Park, Junior Analyst. "Ethan," he said, and offered his hand. She shook it. "I know who you are." She has a photo of you two in her desk drawer. I found it once when I was looking for a stapler. She never put it on her desk, but she never threw it away either. She said this without particular emotion, like someone reading a minor notation on a document. "I'm Lena." He held that information for a moment. A photo, a drawer, not a desk surface. Not a screensaver. A drawer. "You work with her closely?" he asked. "She's my team lead, so yes." Lena looked out at the city. "She's good at her job. She's also..." Lena paused, seemed to decide something. Never mind. Enjoy your evening. Before he could respond, she had moved back into the room, drawn toward the bar. He stood with her almost sentence and turned it over. She's also. The incompleteness of it had the specific texture of someone who knows too much and is choosing, on principle, not to be the one who says it. He checked his watch again. 8:26 p.m. He had another 40 minutes of this. The moment arrived at 9:03 p.m. He was still standing in his peripheral position. He had migrated from the window toward a tall, standing table near the edge of the room, at where a catering station held small plates of food that had been arranged with the effort of cuisine but tasted of convention center. He had eaten 2 of something that might have been tuna and was watching the room the way he watched rooms. He saw it approach before it happened. The geometry of it. Daniel Hartley moving through the room in the direction of the window he had just vacated. And beside Hartley, 2 men he didn't recognize. Senior partners, from the posture and the age and the way the crowd parted slightly as they moved. And Clare, who had been orbiting Hartley for the better part of an hour, now moving with them, laughing at something with her head tilted at the precise angle she used when she wanted to project warmth without losing professional distance. They were moving toward him. Thus, not toward him specifically, toward the edge of the room, toward the views, which people with that kind of seniority tend to gravitate toward because having a view at a party is a form of real estate. Ethan happened to be standing near that real estate. He did not move. He set down his glass of water. He waited. Clare saw him when she was 7 feet away. He saw the exact microsecond it happened, the tiny adjustment in her eyes, not a flinch, something more controlled than that, a recalibration. The smile did not waver. The laugh completed itself naturally, and then Charity was 4 feet away, and 2, and she was standing within arm's reach, and the man who had woken beside her that morning and had made coffee, and had handed her the cup with 2 sugars, because that was how she took it, was looking at her. Hartley said something to her. She responded. And then Hartley turned his attention to Ethan with the reflexive courtesy of someone who acknowledges people in his proximity because it costs nothing. Daniel Hartley, he said, extending his hand. Ethan shook it. Ethan Voss. You with one of our clients? He looked at Clare. For 1 second, perhaps less, Clare's eyes met his. There was no apology in them. There was something more precise than that, a calculation, visible for just that fraction of a second, like a card turned briefly face up before being laid back down. And then she turned to Hartley with a small professional smile and said, I don't believe we've actually met. She extended her hand to Ethan. Clare Sutton, VP of Client Relations. The sentence did not misfire. It did not tremor. It came out of her with the clean, practiced delivery of someone who had. And this was the part that took up residence in him and would not move, rehearsed it. Or something like it. He took her hand. He shook it. He looked at her for exactly as long as it was natural to look at someone you've just met, which is to say, not long at all. Ethan Voss, he said. Financial forensics. Independent consulting. Hartley's expression shifted in the way that expressions shift when a professional credential registers. Forensics? What kind of work? Corporate litigation, mostly. Expert witness work. Sometimes pre-litigation for internal reviews. He kept his voice level, the particular professional levelness he used in depositions. I've worked with a few firms in your sector. Hartley nodded with the approving nod of someone who respects the functionality of a thing, even when he doesn't know what it does. Good, good. Enjoy the evening." They moved on. Clare moved with them. He watched her go. The city lights below had not changed. The ventilation system pulsed again, and the small white ceiling lights trembled faintly. Someone nearby laughed at something with the laugh that precedes the actual funny thing. He stood very still. He was not angry. That was the thing he registered most clearly, not the absence of anger, but its specific quality. Not suppressed, not delayed, simply not present. What was present instead was something older and cooler, like a room that has been empty for a long time and is now being opened. The temperature was different in there. The air was different. He had not allowed himself, until this moment, to fully see it. He had possessed most of the information for some time now. The separations, the compartments, the DH texts, the drawer photo, the 6 years of invitations that never came, the cup of coffee handed back to him that morning without eye contact, the way she said, "Good," when he emerged from the bedroom in his navy suit. He had possessed it all, and had arranged it in his mind the way you arrange furniture you don't like, but haven't yet decided to remove. Something about the handshake had moved all of it at once, like a tray being lifted, like a row of numbers suddenly summing correctly. "I don't believe we've actually met." He retrieved his glass of water. He took a sip. The sparkling water was warm now, the carbonation fading. He checked his watch. 9:07 p.m. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. He scheduled a meeting with himself for the following morning at 7 a.m. and titled it, "Begin Review." He put the phone back in his jacket pocket. He did not leave. He stayed for another 40 minutes, speaking with a few people who wandered near him. A tech firm representative who was a vendor for the firm's systems, a corporate attorney who had done estate work and was curious about forensics, and Lena Park again, who came to stand beside him for approximately 3 minutes near the end of the evening without saying much, and then said, "She's not worth it," and then walked away before he could respond. He had found that interesting. When Clare found him at 9:58 p.m. to collect him for departure, she had the particular brightness of someone whose evening had gone well. Once she looped her arm through his as they walked toward the elevator and said, "I think Daniel really likes me," and he said, "Probably," and she said nothing more the entire ride down. In the car, he drove. She was on her phone again. DH again. He watched the road. He parked outside their building, a 2-bedroom in Midtown East, her name on the lease, his portion of the rent paid as a standing bank transfer every first of the month for 3 years. And she had gone inside first, and he sat in the parked car for 4 minutes. Not to think. He was past the thinking stage. He was at the beginning of the working stage. He went inside. The apartment was the particular version of clean that Clare achieved when she had a big event to return to. Not fully cleaned, but staged, as the surfaces that mattered to her curated, while the drawers and the back of the closet remained in their natural entropy. He had observed this pattern and understood it was a reflection of how she organized most things, the visible version and the actual version. He changed out of his navy suit. He hung it carefully because it was an expensive suit, and he had not bought it for this purpose and would likely use it again under different circumstances. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee that he made because he needed something to do with his hands, while his mind did the first quiet round of organization. The coffee was from a bag he had bought at a bodega on 43rd, $6 medium roast, the kind of coffee that tasted exactly like what it was and nothing more. He liked it precisely because of that. But he had never understood the appeal of pretending something was other than what it was. He opened 4 tabs. The first was his internal case management system, the software he used for professional forensic reviews. The second was his bank account, specifically the joint account he and Claire had opened 2 years ago for household expenses, which they both contributed to monthly. The third was a document folder labeled Property Research that had been sitting dormant on his desktop since October, when they had discussed buying an apartment together, and he had begun assembling the financial documentation that such a purchase would require. The fourth was a contact page for a man named Marcus Webb, who had been his closest friend since their graduate school days at NYU, and who was now a corporate attorney specializing in securities and financial litigation. He did not open anything yet. He sat with the tabs open and drank his coffee, and listened to Claire in the bedroom. The sound of her removing her jewelry, the specific sequence of cabinet closings that meant she was going through her end-of-night routine. He thought about the way she had extended her hand, not the fact of it. He had already fully absorbed the fact of it. He was thinking about the mechanics, the confidence, the lack of hesitation, the way it had required no visible effort. That suggested it was not the first time she had done something like it. It suggested a practiced facility with the redrawing of lines. He thought about what that meant in practical terms. And it meant there were almost certainly other things she had done with similar facility that he had not witnessed directly and had therefore not catalogued. Things that lived in the space between the version of herself she had presented to him and the actual version. This was the part of forensic work he had learned to respect early. The gap. Every fraud, every misrepresentation, every case of deliberate financial concealment had, at its center, a gap. Between what was disclosed and what existed. Between the reported numbers and the actual ones. The gap was never as invisible as the person maintaining it believed. It always left traces. It left them in the rounding, in the timing of transactions, was in the small inconsistencies between documents that were meant to corroborate each other but had been created by someone who didn't fully understand how thoroughly one document referenced another. People thought you needed to be clever to hide things. The truth was that hiding things required a level of systemic thinking that most people, even intelligent people, did not apply consistently. They hid the main thing and forgot about the shadow it cast. He opened the joint account. $47,212. Their combined contributions over 2 years, his portion had been $2,000 per month, Claire's had been $1,500, and the account had been intended for household costs and the property purchase they had been planning. He had, over the past 6 months, had begun depositing extra amounts when his consulting revenue allowed. He believed in financial preparation, the way some people believed in weather forecasting, with the understanding that you could not control conditions, but you could be well positioned for them. He began scrolling through the transaction history. He was looking, specifically, for what he privately called ghost spending. Transactions that were labeled correctly on the surface, but whose frequency, amount, or categorization suggested a second purpose. He had found them in corporate accounts 100 times. He had taught himself to see them the way you teach yourself to see a specific bird in dense foliage. Once you've seen it once, the pattern locks in, and you begin to see it everywhere. He found the first one inside 11 minutes. A recurring charge, monthly, shipped to a vendor labeled BVS Consulting LLC for the amount of $340. It had appeared 8 times over the past 8 months. His portion of the household contributions covered part of this account, which meant his money had contributed to this charge. He did not recognize BVS Consulting LLC. He opened a second tab and searched the business name. New York State Business Registry. Registered 8 months ago. Single member LLC. The registered agent address was a mail forwarding service on West 35th Street. He sat with that for a moment. He had not been asked about this charge. Clare managed the account's bill pay, which was a division of labor they had settled into because she had expressed a preference for it. He had not examined it closely, which was, he recognized, the gap on his side of the ledger. What the assumption of transparency, where transparency had not been verified. He wrote the name in a notebook he kept for professional work, a plain black composition book that he had used in some form or another since his first consulting engagement. He wrote, BVS Consulting, LLC, registered 8 months ago, $340 per month. Mail forward address, West 35th. He kept scrolling. 3 more before midnight. A vendor labeled Platform Services Group that had appeared 4 times at $180. A charge to a fashion rental subscription service listed under the business name Apparel Logistics. He recognized the parent company from a case he had worked 3 years prior involving a corporate expense account that had been systematically used for personal clothing, and a charge simply labeled Transfer Fee Business that had appeared twice, once for $600 and once for $450. He sat back. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere above them, the building creaked in the particular way of buildings that have settled over decades into their own weight. He was not surprised by what he was seeing. He was something more specific than not surprised. He was confirmed. There was a difference. Surprise implied the possibility of a different outcome. Confirmation implied that you had already, on some level, run the numbers. He had been running the numbers for a long time. He closed the bank account tab, opened a new document, and began a timeline. He titled it, Review, EV Personal. November 18th. He worked until 2:30 a.m. Clare did not emerge from the bedroom. He was at his desk at 7:04 a.m. You shot us the following morning when he called Marcus Webb. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which was not surprising. Marcus was the kind of person who treated sleep as a logistical inconvenience, and woke at 5 with the particular alertness of someone who had never understood why others found mornings difficult. Tell me it's a case, Marcus said. I haven't had a good pre-breakfast conversation since the Kellner matter. Personal review, Ethan said. I need your eyes on something. Not urgent, but I want to move properly. A pause. Marcus understood the phrase, move properly. It was a phrase Ethan used when something was being treated with the rigor of a professional engagement rather than personal grievance. It was a phrase that meant no shortcuts, no emotion, full documentation. How bad? Marcus asked. I don't know yet. That's what I'm reviewing. Timeline? 60 days to develop a full picture. Probably less. What am I looking at potentially? Financial, personal, or professional? All 3 may overlap. Another pause. Longer. Are you okay? He considered the question. I'm working, he said. Marcus had known him for 16 years. I'll clear space in my calendar for a call next week. Send me a preliminary document when you're ready. He ended the call and opened his email. Clare was still asleep, or she was awake and on her phone, but either way she had not appeared in the kitchen, which suited him. He had made his own coffee, same bodega bag, and had a notepad beside his laptop, and was in the mode he entered when a review was active, not rapid, not urgent, methodical. So the way you approach a ledger that may span hundreds of pages. You don't start at the end. You don't skip to the compelling section. You start at page 1, and you turn every page. He had woken with a clarity that he attributed to having made the decision. Not the decision about what to do. That would come. but the decision to see clearly, to stop applying the charitable interpretations, to stop tending the gap as though it were someone else's responsibility. He understood now, been doing a specific kind of work for several years. The work of not noticing. It was a skill, not noticing. People dismissed it as weakness or denial, but there was in fact a real effort involved, a constant redirection of attention, a deliberate blurring of edges, a soft, ongoing pressure applied to the parts of your own perception that were beginning to resolve into something you didn't want to look at. He had been very good at this work. He had applied to it the same discipline he applied to his professional work, which was considerable. What he had never applied was the forensics question. The question he asked at the beginning of every engagement, which was, if I approached this without any prior conclusion, with only the available evidence, what would I find? He had never asked that about Clare. He was asking it now. He worked through what he had found in the joint account, creating a proper spreadsheet with transaction dates, amounts, vendor names, and a column he labeled verification status that would indicate for each transaction on whether he had independently confirmed the stated purpose. For the legitimate household expenses, the utilities, the grocery delivery, the internet service, he moved quickly, confirming and notating. For the flagged transactions, he slowed down. BVS Consulting, LLC, required 3 hours of careful searching. He traced the registered agent firm, which was a standard mail forwarding service used by hundreds of small LLCs, and cross-referenced the registration date against Clare's employment history and compensation structure, which he had partial knowledge of from their property discussions. She had disclosed her base salary, $212,000, during the planning conversations, but had been vague about bonus structures, which he had at the time attributed to uncertainty about the amounts. The registration of BVS Consulting coincided, within a 2-week window, with the date he had moved his largest single deposit into the joint account. $40,000 from a corporate litigation settlement that had finally resolved. He sat with that alignment, and let it mean what it meant. He did not rush to conclusions. He noted, correlation, not yet causation. Further documentation required. He wrote it in his notebook with the same dispassionate hand he used for everything in his professional work. On the 4th day of his review, he found the property documents. He had them because he had been the one to compile them. During their apartment search conversations, he had assembled a digital folder with market comparables, mortgage pre-approval materials, and at Clare's request, was a financial disclosure summary that each of them had agreed to prepare as part of the planning process. He had submitted his in full. Every account, every investment, every asset. He had the original shared document folder that they had both accessed. He had never seen her submission. He had asked twice, casually, and she had said she was still assembling it. And then the property conversations had quieted without resolution, and he had not pressed. He had assumed, with the particular assumption of a man who did not want to look at a gap, that it would arrive when she was ready. It had not arrived. What he found instead, when he requested the shared document folder's access log, was that she had opened the folder 41 times over the past 8 months. She had opened it, viewed his disclosure, and closed it without uploading anything. 41 times. He sat with that number. He thought about what that number meant in the context of a woman who was building a property purchase plan with her partner of 4 years. It was a number that belonged to someone who was using the document as a reference, not as a mutual exchange. She had been reading his numbers, his accounts, his investments, his liquidity position, his capacity for contribution. She had been reading them repeatedly, as research. He opened a fresh document and began running the math. He had contributed to their property fund, $47,000 in the joint account, plus the $40,000 deposit, plus an additional $22,000 he had transferred to what Clare called our investment pool, in preparation for a down payment on a property they had discussed at a price point of approximately $1.2 million. That was $109,000. He listed the number plainly on the document. He stared at it for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and called a contact at a financial background search firm he had used for professional engagements for several years. He gave them Clare's full name and her social security number, which he had legitimately in his possession from the joint account application they had both filed. He requested a full financial profile, account holdings, known assets, trust affiliations, real property ownership. The contact said 72 hours. He said, "Appreciated. Gotcha," and ended the call. He did not tell Clare any of this. He watched her move through the apartment over the following days with the specific attention of someone who has recalibrated his perception and is now seeing clearly. He watched her take calls in the bedroom with the door closed. He watched her add things to a new bag that still had its tags on it, a bag he had not seen her purchase. He watched her rehearse in the small bathroom mirror, an expression he recognized as her professional projection face. He watched her exist in the apartment the way she existed in most things, on the surface, with the bottom door locked. He was not angry. He needed to say that to himself occasionally during those days, not because he was in danger of anger, but because it was important to maintain clarity on what was motivating the work. And the work was not motivated by anger. It was motivated by what he could only describe as an obligation to accuracy. He had, for 4 years, been operating on incorrect data. The work was the correction of that. On the 5th evening after the party, Clare mentioned the promotion. She sat across from him at the kitchen table while he was reading, and she said that Hartley had reached out to schedule a one-on-one, and she believed it was about the VP position. Her face had the brightness of someone on the verge of something they had been working toward for a long time. And for just a moment, he saw in it the person he had met at a mutual friend's dinner in 2020, sharp and funny, and operating at an intensity that had struck him then as the kind of intelligence that didn't need to announce itself. He had been right about that part. She was intelligent. He had never had cause to doubt it. The intelligence had simply been organized toward purposes he hadn't fully understood. "That's good," he said. She studied him for a moment, the way she sometimes studied him when she was checking whether he had noticed something. He gave her his professional expression, which looked like attentiveness without being readable, and she seemed to accept it. "You seem different," she said. "Long week," he said. She nodded and went to the refrigerator, and he turned the page of his book and did not watch her, and thought about the access log. 41 times. The financial profile arrived on a Wednesday morning in an encrypted document sent to his professional email. He opened it at his desk while Clare was in the shower. He had 11 minutes, approximately, before she would emerge, and he did not particularly require secrecy. He simply preferred to read it without the ambient presence of the person it described. He found it on page 32. The Sutton Family Revocable Trust, established 2011. Beneficiary, Clare Ann Sutton. Current reported value, $468,000. assets, primarily in index fund positions, and one piece of real property in Westchester County. A vacant lot valued at approximately $112,000. He read the number again. $468,000. He looked at the date of the most recent trust distribution, September of the prior year. The amount? $80,000. The destination? A personal brokerage account in Clare's name, separate from any account she had disclosed to him. But he sat completely still for approximately 30 seconds. Then he picked up his pen and wrote in his notebook. Trust. $468,000. September distribution, $80,000 to personal brokerage, undisclosed in property planning. He heard the shower stop. He closed the document, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. He made 2 cups of coffee, both with 2 sugars because that was how she took hers, and he was not yet at the stage where he stopped performing normalcy. That stage would come. He knew its shape. He had seen it in enough cases to understand that the moment of visible change was always a choice. You chose when it happened, which meant you chose when you were ready for the consequences to begin. He was not ready yet. He had more work to do. Clare emerged from the bedroom in a blazer the color of warm caramel. New, he noted, with the tags recently removed, and the fabric still carrying the slight stiffness of unworn material, and picked up her coffee and said, "Thank you," in a voice that had the practiced warmth of a person who was good at social gestures and meant them at about 40% of their stated intensity. "Big day?" he asked. "Meeting with Daniel at 10, she said. The brightness again. "Good luck," he said. She smiled and went to her bag and began going through it. And he drank his coffee and looked at the city through the kitchen window. The buildings gray-white in the November morning. And he thought about the number. $468,000. He thought about the September distribution. $80,000. Moved to a private account, while she was actively discussing a property purchase with him, in which he had, by that point, also committed $109,000 of his own money, while she had been opening his financial disclosure 41 times, while she had been contributing $1,500 a month to their household account, a number that would have looked very different to him if he had known she was also receiving trust distributions of $80,000 in a private brokerage. He thought about what that information would have meant to the property purchase discussions. It would have changed everything. The contribution split, the loan structure, the equity arrangement, the legal documentation. All of it would have been different if he had possessed accurate information about the actual financial picture. He put down his coffee cup. He walked to his desk and opened a new document. And he titled it, Misrepresentation, Property Planning Context. He began writing. Marcus reviewed it in a 2-hour call the following week. He had sent Marcus the document, 41 pages now, fully sourced, with every transaction traced, every anomaly categorized, every piece of the financial picture assembled. He had also, in a section at the end, included a note about something he had found in the 5th week of his review that had nothing to do with Clare and everything to do with Hartley and Associates. He had found it almost accidentally. When tracing the BVS consulting payments, he had eventually confirmed what he suspected, that the LLC was registered by a nominee, and that its functional purpose, as best he could determine from payment patterns and the absence of any actual deliverable, and was the channeling of funds from the joint account to a source he could not yet fully trace. In the process of that tracing, he had accessed several public disclosures that Clare's firm was required to file with their regulators, Form ADV filings, client agreement templates, fee disclosure documents. He read them with the professional attention of someone who had spent 15 years reading financial documents, and inside the first 2 hours, he found something. In the fee disclosure structure, Hartley and Associates described its advisory services as fee-only, a regulated term in the investment advisory industry that carried specific legal meaning. It meant the firm was compensated solely by fees from clients, with no third-party commissions or revenue-sharing arrangements. Since the term was prominently featured in their client agreements and their public marketing materials, it was, in the framework of financial regulation, a material representation on which clients relied when choosing to trust the firm with their assets. In the firm's most recent Form ADV filing, buried in an appendix that most people would not read with care, was a disclosure about an administrative services arrangement with a third-party technology platform. The arrangement described a fee structure that, in plain language, constituted a revenue-sharing payment to the firm based on client assets under management, which was, by the precise legal definition of the term they were using in their client agreements, was a commission. He had read that footnote 4 times, and he had then pulled the previous 2 years of ADV filings and found the same arrangement described in identical language in the same appendix, in a location specifically chosen to be technically present without being practically visible. It was there if a regulator came looking. It was invisible to any client who had signed an agreement on the basis of the firm's fee-only representation. That was not an accident. That was engineering. He had printed all 3 filings, annotated them, and added a 20-page section to his document. He titled that section, Regulatory, Form ADV Misrepresentation, 3-Year Pattern. On the phone with Marcus, he walked through it methodically, starting with the personal matter and ending with the regulatory section. Marcus was quiet through most of it, which was unusual. Marcus had the particular verbal energy of a lawyer who had processed everything out loud since his first year of law school. The quiet meant he was reading and rereading and running the numbers in his own way. When Ethan finished, Marcus said, "The ADV issue is SEC territory." "I know," Ethan said. "You've worked with the Division of Enforcement before." 3 times. 2 as an expert witness, once as a forensic consultant on a pre-enforcement review. The fee disclosure misrepresentation is significant. If those client agreements go back 3 years, Marcus paused. That's a material misstatement to 700 clients who signed based on a fee-only representation. And if they've been receiving undisclosed third-party compensation in parallel, it constitutes an undisclosed conflict of interest on every single one of those accounts, Ethan said, in addition to the false fee-only designation. Right, Marcus exhaled slowly. And Claire's role is VP of Client Relations. She signs the client agreements. Her signature is on every client engagement document from the past 2 years. Her title, her signature, her division. Marcus said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had the specific, careful tone of someone assembling the full picture. And she doesn't know you've found any of this. No. Ethan, I know. This goes beyond the personal situation. The personal matter is a civil claim, solid, well-documented. Just the trust disclosure gap alone gives you a very recoverable argument on the property contributions. But this, Marcus paused, this is a federal regulatory matter. Yes. If you file this as a whistleblower tip, I know what happens, Ethan said. An SEC investigation into the firm. The investigation would sweep every document, every account, every signatory. Her name is on the client agreements. I'm aware. Another pause, this one longer than the others. Marcus, who had known him for 16 years, did not ask whether he was sure. He asked instead, "Is the documentation complete enough to stand on its own without your involvement once submitted?" "It cites publicly available filings," Ethan said. "It requires no proprietary access, no internal documents, no privileged information. As a first-year enforcement attorney could build a case from what I've assembled using only materials the firm was required to make publicly available under the Investment Advisors Act." "You've done the work, then?" "I do the work," Ethan said. Marcus was quiet for a moment longer. "I'll draft the civil claim documentation for the property matter. For the regulatory matter, you know the procedure." "I do." "Whistleblower submissions to the Division of Enforcement are confidential. Your name is protected under the Dodd-Frank provisions." "I know the provisions. I've explained them to expert witnesses 3 times. He could hear Marcus almost smiling. "Then I'll start on the civil documents this week." He ended the call. He spent the following 2 days completing the regulatory submission package. This was not hasty work. He had seen poorly assembled whistleblower submissions before. In one of his expert witness engagements, a tip had been filed with insufficient specificity, and the enforcement inquiry had stalled at intake because the submitted documentation did not meet the burden of particularity that the division required for opening a formal order of investigation. He had no intention of filing something that stalled at intake. He organized the submission into 3 sections. The first was the factual predicate, a clean, numbered chronology of the fee disclosure issue, citing each Form AD VA by filing date and document reference number, quoting the specific language of the fee-only representation in the client agreement template, and then quoting the specific language of the third-party services arrangement in the appendix. Once he used plain language throughout, the language of a man who had spent 15 years explaining complex financial structures to judges and juries and regulatory reviewers, stripping out every term that required specialized knowledge to understand and replacing it with the plainest accurate word available. The second section was the legal framework, a brief, precise citation of the relevant Investment Advisors Act provisions, the SEC's interpretive guidance on fee-only designations, and the Dodd-Frank anti-fraud provisions that the misrepresentation implicated. He did not over-argue. He stated the rule and stated the conduct, and let the alignment speak. The third section was the harm analysis, a calculation, conservative and documented, of the number of clients who had entered agreements under the fee-only representation as the approximate value of assets under management affected, and the estimated undisclosed third-party compensation the firm had received in the period covered. He labeled every assumption, flagged every number derived from estimation rather than direct documentation, and provided the data sources for everything. He read it through twice when he had finished. He found 2 sentences that contained language he considered imprecise, and he revised them. He added a footnote to the appendix section clarifying the standard of particularity he had applied. Then he closed the document and looked at it on his screen for approximately 20 seconds. He opened the SEC Whistleblower portal. He uploaded the document. He submitted the form. He received an automatic acknowledgement email at 11:47 a.m. on a Thursday. He filed it in his records folder. He made a note of the tracking number. He closed the tab. He opened a new tab and began reviewing a different set of documents, a pharmaceutical company engagement he had accepted several weeks prior, a mid-sized firm whose internal audit department had flagged unusual activity in their expense reporting system. He had been working on it in parallel, and it was overdue for his full attention. He made coffee. Bodega bag, $6, medium roast. He sat down at his desk. He began the new review. Marcus served the civil demand letter on a Monday morning by certified mail and simultaneously sent it to Claire's phone number by PDF. The letter was 47 pages. It detailed, in the structured language of a well-constructed civil demand, the following: the 4-year cohabitation arrangement and the financial arrangements attendant to it. But the joint account, its balance, and Ethan's total contributions. The property planning process, with specific reference to the mutual financial disclosure agreement and the documented failure to provide disclosure. The 41 accesses of Ethan's financial disclosure by Clare, all logged and time-stamped. The Sutton Family Revocable Trust, its value, its recent distribution, its existence as an undisclosed asset during property planning discussions that had resulted in Ethan contributing $109,000 under a materially incomplete picture of the joint financial situation. The BVS Consulting LLC payments, documented and traced, drawn partly from an account to which Ethan had contributed. The apparel logistics charges, the platform services group charges, everything, every flagged transaction, every gap, every logged access, all of it organized into a civil demand with a resolution figure, a response deadline, and Marcus Webb's contact information at the bottom. He was at his desk when she received it. He heard the buzzer, heard her sign for something, heard the sound of an envelope being opened. He counted to 47. Then he heard her walk to his office door. She stood in the doorway, holding the envelope and the document. Her face had the expression of someone who has opened a door expecting one room and found a different architecture entirely. Not panic, not tears. Something more structural. The expression of a person whose model of a situation has just been replaced by a larger, more accurate one, and who is processing the replacement in real time. "What is this?" she said. It was not a question, technically. The inflection made it a statement. He turned from his desk and looked at her. "A demand letter," he said. "Your attorney can respond through Marcus." "Ethan, it's documented," he said. "The trust, the brokerage account, the 41 access logs to the property planning folder, the joint account withdrawals, everything in the letter has source documentation attached." He paused. "You'll want to have your attorney read it carefully, particularly the section on the property contribution." Her face was doing something complicated. He watched it the way he watched faces in depositions, not with feeling, but with attention, calculation, and something that looked, in a different context, close to the beginning of respect. Not for him specifically, for the precision of it. "You've been," she started, and stopped. "Reviewing," he said. Yes." "How long?" "Since the party." She stood in the doorway and looked at him. He looked back. Outside, the November afternoon was the color of dirty concrete, and the city moved behind her through the window with its usual indifference, 10,000 points of movement that did not care about any of this. "I didn't think you noticed," she said. And this was the truest thing she had said to him in a long time. Not an apology, not an explanation, simply the acknowledgement of a miscalculation. The raw, accurate admission of a person who had made an error in their assessment of the counterparty. "I noticed everything," he said. "I just chose when to count it." She looked at him for another moment. He could see the intelligence working behind her expression, running its own calculations, assessing positions and options. He had nothing against the intelligence. He had never had anything against it. He simply was no longer willing to be an undisclosed asset in its portfolio. She walked away from the door. He turned back to his desk. She was gone by the following Saturday. Not all at once. She took the essential things first, which he observed with the same dispassion he had applied to everything else. The good bags, the important clothes, the laptop, the small framed prints she had bought herself and that she had been very clear when they first put them up, were hers and not theirs. He helped her carry a box to the car without being asked. She did not say thank you. He did not expect her to. When the elevator closed and he was back in the apartment, he stood in the center of the living room for approximately 1 minute. The room was different without her things, not emptier exactly, but corrected, like a spreadsheet after a reconciliation where every line finally aligns with the corresponding account. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop and began the pharmaceutical engagement in full. A mid-sized firm whose internal audit team had been right to flag the expense reporting irregularities. He could see within the first 20 minutes of focused work that the irregularities were not random. They had a pattern. The pattern belonged to someone who understood the system well enough to use it, but not well enough to understand how thoroughly systems document themselves. He found the first thread and pulled it gently. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. It was the thing he did best. And he had spent a long time allowing other things, the domestic arrangements, the drawer photos, the performance of not noticing, to exist alongside it without examining what that coexistence revealed about his own choices. He had his own gap. He had been the one maintaining it. He was done with that particular maintenance job. He made a note in his composition book, opened a new spreadsheet column, and began working through the transactions with the clean, unhurried attention of a man who has decided to see clearly and has not changed his mind. 2 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in January, his phone lit up with a call from a number he recognized but had not expected to see. He was in a coffee shop on Madison Avenue, the real kind, not a chain, and so 4 tables and a machine that sounded like a small engine, and a barista who had been making the same espresso for 15 years, and knew exactly when to stop the pull. He was reviewing documents for the pharmaceutical engagement, which had expanded significantly, and had taken to working here in the afternoons when the apartment, newly rearranged to suit one person, felt too quiet. The name on the screen was Clare. He looked at it for the length of 1 ring. He watched his own hand on the table, the pen still resting in his fingers. The coffee shop was warm and smelled of ground beans and old wood, and the specific industrial warm smell of a steam wand operated correctly. The barista was rinsing a cup. A woman 2 tables over was writing something by hand in a spiral notebook he picked up. The firm is under investigation." She did not say hello. Her voice had the tight, over-controlled quality of someone managing a very large amount of emotion with a container that was slightly too small for it. "I just got a call from a securities attorney. An SEC inquiry. They want documents going back 3 years. The fee disclosures, the client agreements, all of it. Daniel is—" She stopped. Someone filed a tip. Someone with professional knowledge of financial disclosures, forensic-level knowledge. A pause with something in it. "You filed it." He looked out the window at the January street, the city doing its yearly reset into gray, the light flat and cold, people walking with their shoulders carried slightly higher than in other seasons, braced. A man in an overcoat walked past the window with a coffee he hadn't started yet. "Oh, you filed it and you didn't tell me," she said. The control was developing a crack along its edge. The specific crack that appears when someone has been holding something rigid for too long, and the material begins to express its own stress. If I had known what you found, if you had come to me first, I would have... He watched the man with the coffee turn the corner. Ethan. Her voice changed again. Smaller now. The brightness gone entirely. I would have, he said. You had 41 chances. The line was quiet. He ended the call. He put his phone face down on the table. He looked at his documents. He picked up his pen. He found the line where he had stopped, and he drew a small mark at the beginning of the next entry, the way you mark a page when you have been interrupted and need to reorient yourself to the work. And he began again.